Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Henley again here for another episode of the show. We want to thank you all for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google or Stitcher or wherever you want to listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate it. If you are on YouTube, again, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel while you're here and give this video a like and share it around as well. Leave your comments down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on anything we talk about here. It's in off-season mode, but before we get really fully into off-season mode, I want this episode to kind of be putting a bow on the season that was for Tennessee. We'll get to that in a second. First, Gene, I want to kind of blast through some of these news and info and stuff here off the top since last time we spoke, because we've had a few different things hit the wire since we last recorded a podcast. A couple of big ones were, in fact, last time you and I talked, we were talking about what Rick Barnes would do with his assistant coaching position that he had vacant on his staff. Well, that stayed internal. He promoted within to the associate head coach role and promoted within to the assistant coaching role. And the new assistant coach for Tennessee is none other than Greg Polinsky, who served 1 year as a volunteer analyst on Tennessee's staff in this past season for the 21-22 season. And now he is going to be an assistant coach for Tennessee. And he's not some young up-and-comer, Gene. He's a guy who been around the block a little bit. He's only, I think, like 4 or 5 years younger than Rick Barnes. He was born, actually, he just had a birthday recently. He was born March 15th, 1958 in St. Louis. St. Louis, Missouri. He's been around the block for a little bit. He's back in college this past season for the first time since the 1990s. But Gene, he spent, I think, 23 seasons in the NBA before he came back and joined Rick Barnes at Tennessee as a volunteer analyst this past year. He started in the NBA in 1999 as a scout for the New Jersey Nets, and then he got promoted to director of scouting for the Nets in 2004. Stayed with the Nets when they transitioned to Brooklyn and became a director of player personnel for them in 2008. Went to the Detroit Pistons, also as a director of player personnel in 2018. Was there for 2 seasons with them. So he was a scout, a director of scouting, and a director of player personnel in the NBA. In the 90s, though, he served as actually in the 80s, to start from there, served as a part-time assistant coach for Texas, was promoted to a full-time assistant coach at Texas in 1984, served as an assistant for Alabama in 1986 through 1994, and then was promoted to associate head coach in 1994 there, and was the head coach of Georgia Southern from 1995 to 1999 before moving into the NBA. So, Gene, you're talking about bringing a guy on with experience and someone who maybe even had coaching experience. And you mentioned Frank Haith. Well, this guy, goodness, you want to talk about experience. Again, 20 plus years in the NBA, and then really even another almost 20 in the college ranks as an assistant, and then also 4 seasons as the Georgia Southern head coach. I think this makes sense. Promoting within to a guy who'd been on staff already, and a guy who's been around the block, and a guy with a lot of NBA experience, a guy who knows what the NBA is looking for and players and stuff like that, and kind of, can it maybe help guide Tennessee's roster, some of the NBA talented prospects that Tennessee has on the roster, and let them know, like, hey, this is what the NBA is looking for. This is kind of what, how you should be molding yourself. I think it makes sense, and I genuinely think this is a good hire. Like, I mean, it's promoting within. I guess technically not a new hire per se, but promoting within to an assistant coach. I think Greg Polinsky makes a lot of sense to me, and I think he has a lot of unique experience that I don't think any of the assistants Rick Barnes has ever had at Tennessee has had this type of experience before. Not with this kind of NBA caliber talent that he's seen and coached and scouted at the NBA level.
Yeah, and you looked at some of those Brooklyn Nets teams that kind of went through in his time frame, and I don't know the exact years. I just know he spent the vast majority of his career with Brooklyn. Like, that's getting guys like, I don't know. I think Kerry Kittles was before then, but like some of the, I mean, like to see some of the Nets teams that went through, I understand, like, they weren't always great, but and again, I'm struggling to remember exactly some of the talent that went through there, but I know that there were some quality teams that weren't just like the store-bought teams, essentially, because I know at one point they got guys like Durant. I'm sorry, not Durant. Obviously, they've got Durant and Irving, and they had Harden and Simmons, that whole situation. But they had Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce at one point, Darren Williams. Jason Kidd was on that, I think, was there early in Polinsky's career. So to be able to see the sorts of talent, Kenyon Martin,
he helped. Looking back in the 90s and early 2000s, he helped draft guys like Kenyon Martin in 2000, Kyle Korver in 03. So those are some of the early names on there too of guys. Brook Lopez was the guy he helped identify. I assume helped identify and draft as well.
Well, and the interesting thing about Kenyon Martin is the fact I'm pretty sure he tore his ACL at Cincinnati, I think, his senior year, and I'm not even sure he was. I don't think he played. I know he tore his ACL. I don't know if he played at all that year. And, the Nets still took a chance on him, and obviously it worked out pretty well. But yeah, I mean, like, you've got to, you have to believe that there has to be some benefit there for him to have that experience. I'm not 100% sure. I know kind of what's said. I guess to develop once you get to college, I guess the best thing that you can, it's the best benefit is to be able to, okay, now that you're here, this is what you have to work on to get there. He could be somebody that's really good for a guy like Brandon Huntley Hatfield, who I think has those aspirations, but is kind of in this area where he doesn't 100% know necessarily what it takes, and he's young, and that could be beneficial for him. Like all those young bigs, to get players like that, it has to be beneficial. So, I had thrown out Frank Haith, but I mean, and it has at least some merit to it. But when you have a guy that has the experience that Polinsky has, then you've got the guy just stashed away, then it makes all the sense in the world that, hey, you know what, in case of emergency, break the glass. And well, in this case, that glass is broken.
It's also funny that he and Barnes actually, they were like ships passing in the night, as the old phrase goes, because when he accepted the assistant coaching position at Alabama, it was because that position opened up because Rick Barnes left Alabama to become an assistant at Ohio State. So he literally took Rick Barnes' the position he left at Alabama, Polinsky did, to become the assistant coach there. It's funny, some of the names that he coached under as an assistant. A guy we'd mentioned on the podcast before when we were kind of making fun of Petty or at Alabama for how long he'd been there, but he coached under Whip Sanderson at Bama, Gene. He also coached under David Hobbs, and he coached under Bob Weltlick, at Texas. So he coached under some names that I hadn't heard in a long time, but some names that I recognized from the 80s and 90s college basketball scene too.
Yeah, just throwing Whip Sanderson's name just brings a smile on my face. The rest of the guys, obviously, some names. I mean, older names. But yeah, just Whip Sanderson just makes me happy. Yeah, I mean, it just does. I mean, there's no way around it. Like, that's just, it's one of those things like, that's my guy, and I've never met the guy, and that won't happen. But yeah, I mean, that just brings a smile on my face that's how far back we're going. It's almost like listening to an episode of First Take now, whenever Mike, Mad Dog Russo's on there, and he's throwing all these obscure, like, 60s baseball players that nobody remembers. Like, there's kids nowadays who won't believe that Wimp Sanderson is an actual name. But no, he was. It happened. That era happened at Alabama.
Yeah, and there's a lot of names from back in the day that we can go and look back and people wouldn't believe were real names or nicknames or something. I mean, a lot of nicknames that make sense, but actual real names of some of the players and coaches back in the day are great. But yeah, so that was, I think, a good move, promoting Gainey to associate head coach, like where Michael Schwartz was. Again, all promoting within, I think those are fine moves. I think it helps preserve some continuity, which is good after the last offseason where you basically had to rearrange everything except for Schwartz because of Kim English and Des Oliver getting those head coaching positions as well. So, I think it makes sense, and those are good moves. Some more roster movement for Tennessee here is as of recording this podcast, we still haven't gotten official word about Kennedy Chandler going to the NBA, but it'll happen. But we'll talk more about the roster in a next episode. I think is kind of how I'm structuring it. Is this one's going to be a retrospective on the season, reflecting on it. Next episode will be kind of focusing on the future of the offseason, looking at the roster. But I do want to get one note here about the roster, and that is Victor Bailey Jr. Put his name in the transfer portal and is going to George Mason, which not a surprise. I think that was one of the names we united for sure. I don't know if we'd said it outright, but that was a guy that I think we both thought would transfer this offseason. It makes a lot of sense. His last year at Tennessee, this past season, did not go anywhere, I guess, close to where he thought it probably would. And anywhere I think really most people thought it would go. Had a huge drop off in his shooting numbers. And then this year only averaged 2.5 points basically for the season. He did play some pivotal minutes and kind of came on stronger at the end of the season, kind of the last 3-4 weeks or so of the season for Tennessee, and played some key minutes off the bench. But just never could get a consistent shot following. Had like 2 games the whole year where he was notable from 3. Otherwise, it was a lot of swings and misses for him. But he's going to go be reunited with Kim English at George Mason, a assistant coach at Tennessee that I think Bailey really, really liked, and again, makes a lot of sense. I think he'll thrive at George Mason. He'll also be reunited with former teammate Devontae Gaines down there at George Mason. So, Gene, it wasn't a surprise that it's Victor Bailey Jr. and also the destination from all the rumblings and stuff I'd seen and heard. Also, not a surprise, and I think it's a good fit again because I think him and Kim English had a pretty strong relationship, and I think that's a really good spot for Victor Bailey to be in a spot that I think he can thrive in.
And that's all you can ask for. I understand that the portal is very trendy. There's a lot of things that go into play with the transfer portal nowadays, and it's there's people will speak on the positives of it, the negatives of it, and I get it. I get both, but Bailey wasn't going to play again in Knoxville. He has eligibility left because of the COVID year. He wasn't going to play again. And it's tough. And like, I understand, this is school number 3 for him and probably didn't plan on leaving. But, the last time that he played meaningful minutes in an important game was Georgia, the Georgia game in March. And I don't think that he played 18 minutes against Missouri, but I'm pretty sure that I don't think that was a close game. I know he played 20 against Longwood, but let's be honest. Let's be clear.
Right.
I'm just looking at his minutes allocation. He played a lot against Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Played against Georgia, and I think that was the Bama game was because of the COVID taking out Chandler and Fulkerson.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then every other game I'm looking at here is 20 minutes against Texas Tech, but he was 1 of 6, just like everybody else was that game. Colorado, they handled that. There weren't many games. Villanova, not many games against the sorts of teams that Tennessee wants to compete against nationally, where he played a lot. And that's usually a true determinant of where you stand in the pecking order. Like if you got a lot of 2 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and you're a senior, that tells a lot about where you stand. It's not going to get better the following year, I can tell you that.
Yeah, no, and again, it helps. I think it was best for both parties because, like you said, he wasn't going to play again, and I think he's again that's a good fit for him. I wish him all the best. I liked him as a person, and I think I think he'll thrive at George Mason, especially with Kim English there. And the system I think that Kim's trying to run there and what he's trying to do at George Mason. And again, it also, which we'll talk more about next week, opens up a spot for Tennessee on the roster for them to go add either a guy like Julian Phillips, who they're really pursuing, or a transfer like the Murray kid who's transferred from LSU. Like those are 2 big names that, which oddly enough, both have LSU ties, that Tennessee's been pursuing and they've been tied to so far in the transfer market and in the recruiting market. So we'll talk more about that next week, but did want to get that out of the way here. Another news and note before we get into the meat of it is that Rick Barnes got a contract extension, Gene. He's been extended another year for his contract. I never saw a mention of a raise for it. I just saw that it was an extension. Could be a raise. Also, Kellie Harper got an extension, and she did get a raise. Apparently, it wasn't reported by Tennessee, but I saw it written by, I think, the USA Today affiliate for Georgia, like somewhere down in the state of Georgia, was talking about their head coach for Georgia, the new head coach down there, and her salary, and mentioning that Kellie Harper's extension gave her a $200,000 raise to get her up to $1 million per year, which was good. That's really good money. Could be higher, should be higher considering. I don't want to get into that debate right now, but it's good that's that number, but it should be higher. But Rick Barnes gets a contract extension. He's going to be at Tennessee for another year or so. I don't think it's a shock. Gene, this kind of, I think, lends into the conversation we'll be having here in a second. But when you go and do something that your team hasn't done positively in over 40 years, I think you earn yourself a contract extension. And I think also when you look at just kind of the season as a whole, where the team was in kind of early January, mid-January, and where they ended up, getting 27 wins, winning the SEC tournament for the first time since 1979. Again, I know they're bounced in the second round of the NCAA tournament, but as we'll kind of talk about here in a second, I don't think that should define the whole season. When you look at the season as a whole, I think it was a deserved contract extension. And again, I don't know that there was a raise. If there was, I don't imagine it was a hugely significant one for Rick Barnes. But you go 27-8, 14-4 in the SEC after starting out 2-3 in SEC play, especially. And then go win the SEC tournament. I think it's a deserved raise, and I didn't see very many people complaining about it. And there was a very small sect, but the overwhelming majority thought from what I saw reaction wise, were saying it was well deserved, and that it makes sense given the contract extension. And in fact, UT's administration were handing out a lot of contract extensions over the last week or week and a half. So it wasn't just Rick Barnes; it was about everybody on campus who had success. Were getting contract extensions. The soccer head coach got an extension. Tennis, I think, got one. Volleyball got one. Barnes got one. Harper got one. I think the only thing missing so far was football, and I would expect some sort of thing with at least the assistants or something at some point for football too. But Gene, I think both Kellie Harper and Rick Barnes getting extensions make sense because, again, Harper did something that the Lady Vols haven't done in 6 years, and that's with a team that would have been ravaged by injuries, and that was make the Sweet 16. So, and they were having a really good season up until, again, injuries bit them a butt with Kean Green and then with Jordan Horston. So I think both extensions make a lot of sense, and I think Kellie Harper's raise also makes sense.
Yeah, and and shout out to women's sports. I mean, that tournament this year has been really good. I caught a couple minutes of NC State UConn. Saw a minute or two of NC State Notre Dame. So the end of that, shout out to they're doing a great job, and happy to really see starting to see the money be reflective, see the ratings reflective of just how special that sport can be. I mean, I don't see anybody really complaining. I mean, obviously I've kind of been checked out of what's going on as far as reaction to things happening in Knoxville, but yeah, I don't see how anybody could really have a gripe. I guess the people who have gripes are the ones who would have gripes anyway because don't win in March. But I mean, if you just watch the team over the course of 33 games, that's a team that got better over the course of the season. Mm-hmm. But when you put your you can't put your measurements into a one game sample size in March as to how good a season's been. You obviously want to win all the NCAA tournament games and be champions, but there is no perfect measurement to sports. So which one's best? And look, and to me, 27 wins, 27 wins, conference championship, in the tournament for the first time in 40 years, over 40 years, that matters. And, I've talked about this before, so many people, I say casual college basketball fans will base their team's success on trophies. That team 4 years ago didn't have trophies, so there was an issue. Well, we're number one in the country. I mean, y'all were number one in the country. Well, we didn't. What did we win? We didn't win the regular season. We didn't win the tournament. We lost in the NCAA tournament. You got a trophy this year, a nice big fat trophy that says SEC tournament champions. So yeah, obviously it stinks that things didn't go like you thought they would go in the tournament, but that's pretty much the same for 67 other teams.
Mm-hmm.
So far, that's been the case for 63 of those teams. 64 of those teams. Like we're down. I mean, we're down to 4, and got to win in dominating fashion. You lost to a team that had, that was kind of playing with a chip on the shoulder and got hot. But I'd say everything that happened on both sides is deserved, because I mean the men's thing, the men had their success. On the women's side, you and I were out there getting minutes for that team just because of how limited they were with numbers and stuff, and it hurts. Like, you get excited because the thing with the women's side is the media is itching for Tennessee Lady Vols basketball to be back.
Yeah.
It's like the whole Texas football thing. So anytime that something positive happens, that's a positive. Like, that's something you've got to your advantage. But I know some fans get mad about what happens with football, and they feel like there's this anti-bias in football, or there's this anti-bias in this sport and men's basketball. But there is no anti-Tennessee bias in women's basketball. Like, the media is so begging for the Lady Vols to be good. And it'll be reflective anytime they win a halfway decent game against a top 25 team. Because there really aren't 25 great teams in women's college basketball. So therefore, schools like Tennessee are going to get the benefit of the doubt whenever they start off 13-1 or something like that. But like, when you just look back at the totality of the season, they were good, but you could kind of tell that they were kind of put together by duct tape as the season went along, and it just kind of finally came to a head at the end. But it was still a great season. Mm-hmm. And as long as they continue their success, they're going to get the bump. They're going to get the bump. It's the same bump that Duke gets, the same bump that a Carolina would typically get, except for a year like there, which was weird. Kansas bump. Villanova's a new blood. They're starting to get that bump. And one thing you want in sports more than anything else is a benefit of the doubt. The Lady Vols have that. And as long as Kellie Harper, continues to build this thing the right way, then the Lady Vols will get the benefit of the doubt. And guess what that's going to lead to? Championships. Maybe this year, maybe I don't know when. I mean, obviously not this year. Maybe this coming year, maybe after that, who knows? But when you start seeing the players that they're bringing in through the portal, and obviously from high school, then you start to realize, maybe you can recruit, because it's no longer about having in men's and women's side. Nobody really cares with the ranking of your class. Nobody really cares about that. It sounds nice that we got the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the country. I don't know where Tennessee was ranked before, in April of last year, but I know they ended number 2 because of reclassification and all this, that, and the other. And as you start seeing teams really, replenish their roster to the portal, then you start to realize. Watch what South Carolina does.
Yeah,
I've got knowledge of that. Like, watch what they're going to do. Like, that roster will look completely different next year. And who cares where class is ranked? So if you can bring in a nice blend of both, you're going to be fine. I think that's what Kellie has shown that she can do, because they don't lose a lot off this year's team. Some key losses, of course, but I mean, they've also got some key pieces that aren't just ballyhooed high school prospects. They've shown they can do it at the highest levels. See Rakia Jackson.
Oh yeah. And for context, for those wondering, when Jim was talking about South Carolina, the school he covers, UTC, as you'll probably know, their head coach is now the head coach at South Carolina. So that's what Jim was saying when he talks about he has a little bit of knowledge of what could happen for the Gamecocks now, because Gene just finished up covering coaching search for both the men's and women's basketball programs at UTC. So Gene's been a little busy this past week. But now they both made hires, and as I said, Lamont is now the head coach over at South Carolina. But to your point too, Gene, about the Lady Vols too, is that you could even, you could also argue this year for this team and Kellie Harper. I mean, you could argue that Kellie Harper and the coaching staff had to basically kind of reinvent their vision of the team twice, maybe you could say even 3 times if you want to count the Keegan Green injury. But at the beginning of the year when Ray Burrell went down, I mean, down in the first game, and you're thinking, okay, well, she was out for a month-ish, I think, like 12 games or something like that. She missed 16 games, maybe she missed. It was a big chunk of games that she missed. You had to reinvent yourself early on. She comes back, and you have to kind of get her reacclimated and get used to that, and the change in the team chemistry that way. And then you lose Keegan Green, and then you lose Jordan Horston, your do-it-all who was leading your team in scoring, rebounding, and assists, like the literal heart and soul do-it-all of the team goes down for the last, month of the season, and you had to reinvent yourself at that point too. So the fact that they ended on a Sweet 16 run and still had the type of success they were able to have throughout the year, I think it just further speaks to the coaching job this season for Coach Harper, Coach Williams, and I guess both Coach Harpers, Coach Williams and Coach Joy over there as well. So, but I think that's a good transition of what we were talking about for the season for the men's team, especially, and kind of contextualizing it. And you made a good point already, Gene, and I want to build off that, kind of looking at this year. You go 27-8. You win the SEC tournament for the first time in 4 years, or 40 years, 43 years to be exact. But then you get a 3 seed. You feel like you've been disrespected. Should have been a 2 seed. You go out and wallop Longwood like you should. And then you lose to a Michigan team that has the talent to be a top 16 seed in the NCAA tournament, but just had issues throughout the year, couldn't get it all together, and it looked like they were coming together and gelling together at the right time, but they unfortunately, they lost. Well, unfortunate for them, I guess, lost their next game in the Sweet 16, but still gave a good fight in that game against Villanova. And now Villanova is a Final Four team, so no shame in losing to that Villanova team. But kind of, I think it's really difficult to look at this season, and I hate trying to say if a season was a success or giving it like an A, B, C grade or anything like that. I'm not a huge fan of doing that, but I kind of want to look at the season as a whole, Gene, and say, was it a great season, or was it a really good season, or was it a good season? Because it wasn't bad. There's no way you can say it's a bad season unless you really just have a zero-sum view of college basketball and only really care about what happens in March. And I will say, Tennessee won an SEC tournament, and it was the month of March. Last time I checked when they won it. But if you're going to be really nitpicking and specific and say only the NCAA tournament, then okay, then I guess maybe it was a bad season for you if that's kind of your zero-sum approach. And hey, if that's how you view it, that's fine. Like, that's not how I view it, but if that's how you want to look at it, then I'm not going to argue with you. I think it's valid enough, and I may disagree with you, but it is what it is. But Gene, for some context, kind of to me, that really kind of made me lighten up a little bit on kind of the negative way the season ended. Looking at the year as a whole, the 27 wins for Tennessee this year is actually the 4th most in program history. That's kind of shocking when you think about it, just because of, that doesn't seem like an overwhelming amount, and especially if you look at teams like, the Blue Bloods, who consistently have won the upper 20s and the 30 games in a season. But Tennessee, they've only done that. This is only the 6th time in program history they've won more than 25 games in a year. So 27 wins. Rick Barnes and Bruce Pearl now have both are in the top 4 seasons in school history. Both have 2 of those top 4 seasons. Barnes and Pearl both had 31 wins. Pearl had a 28-9 season that when they made it to the Elite 8, and then now Barnes has a 27-8 season. So 4th most wins in a season in school history. You finished in the top 5 in the AP poll for only the 2nd time in school history in terms of finishing in the top 5 in the AP poll, not starting or not even just getting there, but actually finishing in the top 5. You made it to the NCAA tournament, and again, you won the SEC tournament. I can't stress that enough, for the first time in 43 years. It wasn't like you had that Georgia run from a few years ago where they weren't a great regular season team and happened to go on a miracle run in the SEC tournament to win it. This was a team that finished 14-4 in the SEC and was a top 4 team in the SEC and had an outside chance, but a chance nonetheless of actually winning the regular season title if Auburn had dropped another game at some point down the stretch. They didn't, so Tennessee finished 2nd, but still you finished 2nd in the regular season and then 1st in the conference tournament. Again, you got to the NCAA tournament and got bounced in the 2nd round. But I want to throw something out there, Gene. You and I have talked about it multiple times on this podcast, and I've not had the the numbers in front of me to really say, but we've talked about how this Tennessee does not have an elite history in March. And people always want to throw out the Rick Barnes in March or whatever. And to some extent, he's kind of earned that because, again, he hasn't had a lot of success in March. And at least not the last, I guess, 15 years or so, that 10, 15 years, maybe more like 10 instead of 15, but the last decade or so when he's at Texas and at Tennessee, he's not had the most success in March. So it's fair to say, hey, it's him in March is not is like oil and water. They don't mix. But Tennessee as a program has had far less success in March than Rick Barnes has had as his career as a head coach, period. So Tennessee, looking at when the NCAA tournament expanded to 64 teams, which was in 1985. Tennessee, since that point in I did this math earlier, I think in 30 something years, so it'd be 94, 04, 14. So in almost 40 years, I think obviously one of those years there wasn't the tournament because of COVID, but in almost 40 years, I guess 37-ish tournaments or so, since it expanded to 64 teams and now 68, but since the last big expansion of the tournament, Tennessee's made the NCAA tournament just 16 of those times, Gene. So not even half of the years since it expanded to 1985 has Tennessee even made the tournament. Of those 16 seasons when they've made the NCAA tournament, they've managed to reach at least the Sweet 16 6 times. Of course, one of those they went on to the Elite Eight, but in 2000, 2007, 08, 2010, 2014, 2019. So Tennessee reached at least the Sweet 16 in 6 of the 16 tournaments they have made since 1985. They have the same amount of times they've made it to the Sweet 16 as they've failed to win a game, as times they've gone one and done. Tennessee has failed to make it to the round of 32 6 times, or I guess second round, however you want to word it, 6 times in 16 of their last 16 appearances since 1985, and they've made it to the Sweet 16 6 times. So it's really kind of been boom or bust for Tennessee. They've been able to either get at least to the second weekend of the tournament, or they're bounced in the first round. It's even been a rarity that Tennessee's been able to advance to the next round, the second round. Tennessee's been bounced from there a couple of times. You look at obviously this past year, you look at Rick Barnes' first year in the tournament when in 2018, yeah, that math is right. In 2018, got bounced in the second round there as well. I mean, Bruce Pearl had a couple of teams get bounced in the second round and get bounced in the first round too. Had that happen to him a couple of times. He had a Sweet 16, I think 2 Sweet 16 runs, I forget, and obviously the Elite Eight too. But Gene, I think just putting that in context, 16 times since 1985, Tennessee has made the NCAA tournament, and they have just as many one-and-done tournaments as they do Sweet 16 runs. There's not a lot of history there for Tennessee. So to say that this season, to have, I think, a largely negative view on this season and painting it as Rick Barnes in March, I don't think is fair for a lot of reasons, but I think really specifically because it's not like Tennessee has a storied history in the NCAA tournament. I saw someone online make a good point too of like, Tennessee isn't a blue blood. They're not going to get, as you literally just talked about with the Lady Vols, Gene. I didn't think about this, but that fits perfectly into what I'm saying. Lady Vols get the benefit of the doubt. And you said, like, one of the things you want, especially in college basketball or just in sports in general, is to get the benefit of the doubt. Lady Vols and UConn, especially UConn lately, gets a favorable draw. They get to, whether they're a 1 seed, a 2 seed, a 3 seed, they get to be basically on their home court and in an area like Bridgeport that is basically another home game for their kind of home arena for them, even when they get to the Sweet 16. Lady Vols have had a lot of luck in that in the past few years. Not this year when they had to go to Wichita, but in previous years when Lady Vols were, consistently very good. The next round would be somewhere in the South, not too far from Knoxville, would be Greenville or something like that. Tennessee, the men's team, has not had that, and they have not been getting that because they're not a blue blood. They don't, if they'd been a Duke maybe, or if they'd been like a blue blood, like a Kentucky or Duke or whatever, there's a good chance Tennessee is a 2 seed and not a 3 seed like they were this year. And who knows, obviously it wouldn't matter if they stayed in the bracket they were in, but what if they moved into a different bracket? What if they moved into the East, or they moved into the West, or whatever bracket? How different would their draw have been if they have been given, quote unquote, the benefit of the doubt? They've not historically had that, even with Rick Barnes there, who has been, is a I guess kind of maybe a blue blood of a head coach. I don't know how you would kind of describe him, but Gene, I've rambled enough here. I want to get your thoughts on it, but I think just contextualizing the season as a whole, if it's great, really good, however you want to say it, I think it's a very solid good to really good because you did something you haven't done in 4 decades. And yes, you get bounced early, and that's really heartbreaking and frustrating. But this team was really fun to watch. After a while, especially, they were ugly to watch on offense early in the year, but they became fun to watch. And the personality of this team, I think that was one of the reasons why myself and I know a lot of all fans were heartbroken and upset when the season came to crashing end, because this team was a lot of fun to watch, and you got to fall in love with the personalities of guys like Zakai Ziegler, of Kennedy Chandler, of kind of the grittiness of Urosh out there, of Josiah, and seeing him kind of come into his own as the season went along. I think, and Santiago Vescovi and his personality and everything too. And I think that this season will not be remembered, I think, maybe as negatively in the long run as others, because of, even though it did end earlier in the NCAA tournament than you would hope, because of the SEC tournament title victory and because of the personality of this team. So I'll let you talk, Gene, because I've talked for a very long time without really getting a break. So sorry about that.
No, it's good. I'll just simply say this. To the point about the benefit of the doubt, Tennessee kind of has two things working against it. I mean, one, its own postseason history. Two, the postseason history, perceived or otherwise, of Rick Barnes. So you add those two things together, and it just doesn't typically work out that way. Good season. I think the biggest reason for excitement for the season is the fact that you saw development from guys that you needed to see development from. It wasn't just simply Kennedy Chandler. It's like guy Ziegler, from the expectations of that kid coming in to becoming a quality player, to the improvements of Huntley, Hatfield, and Adu. To see all these younger pieces. You certainly wanted to see Justin Powell maybe come on. He may have to figure some stuff out himself. So when you look and just see the improvements of the individuals on the roster, that tells me, everything else. I didn't even mention, Josiah Jordan James, but you kind of mentioned that. To see the improvements on the roster like that, to me, would lend hope to and excitement to what next year could be once the roster is fully shaped. And it's so hard in March nowadays. Usually the season ends and you figure out, you kind of know what you have next year. It's March 31st and we have zero clue what next season's roster is going to look like. You have an idea, but there's no clue whatsoever what the finality of this roster is going to look like. What guy in the portal is going to get poked? Is going to get picked up by Tennessee. How is a guy like B.J. Edwards? How is he going to fit in next season? What other pieces are out there that people don't even know about yet? And I think that's what should lend some excitement, because when I say, when you and I speak on how the season ended, not talking about the Michigan game, get that. Didn't end up people wanted it to. But if you look at the last 15 games or so, that's kind of what people are talking about, where your only losses are a couple points on the road at Arkansas, a couple points on the road at Texas, and the NCAA tournament game. I think those are like the last three bad ones. We're talking about a team that at one point was 13 and 5 or something along those lines, and everybody was frustrated. LSU lost. People frustrated. Got people texting me about it. What's wrong with the team? Blah, 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 whatever. And now all of a sudden you see them win some games. You mentioned last time we did this podcast about how the Kentucky loss kind of turned things around, and you can see it. You could see it in how the players played, how they meshed, how they gelled, how everybody kind of fit into certain pieces and roles, how Barnes kept people engaged to where you kind of got some good minutes out of Victor Bailey in a game when that kid was playing 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes in some certain games, how you got some certain minutes out of Adu, who, at 18 years old, probably wanted to play from day one and couldn't immediately get out there. Got a little antsy. Same thing with Huntley Hatfield, getting a little antsy. All of a sudden, the Olivier Kama goes down with the injury. Now, all of a sudden, we need you guys. And that speaks to the coaching job, the true coaching job that Barnes did. Again, I'm not going to judge him off one game. It stunk. But, 67 teams don't win a championship. you certainly wanted to make maybe like at this point the separation. If you got beat by Michigan the exact same way in the Sweet 16, the only difference is that it's a Sweet 16. You still lost the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change, doesn't matter. It's just, like I understand you want to get to the Sweet 16, you want to get to the Elite Eight, but you want to get to the second weekend basically, and fell short of that this year, and have only been 8 times in your history. But I mean, you have to kind of figure there that it's coming. They're knocking on the door too much, in my opinion, to continue to go out round of 32, which, they've done twice under Barnes, round of 64, which they did once, Sweet 16, which they did once. They're knocking the door too much to not eventually get in there and get to the Elite Eight and potentially to a Final Four, because they're not losing the players that they need to keep to be successful. They lost 2 guys last year that people thought were going to hurt, and they were better this year. They're losing one minor piece, great kid, minor piece of the roster at this moment. More could happen. Let's see what happens with Tamba. I just threw that name out there. I really have zero intel on that, so please don't go saying that I've said anything. But you just have to wonder. I mean, will that kid get to a point where he can truly help this team? If he does, more power to him. If that kid realizes maybe this isn't for me or believes, then we'll see. But there may be more things happening on the roster, and, you could improve from there. Powell wasn't somebody that people necessarily thought was going to happen this time next year. Everybody was frustrated because, everybody was mad at everybody's favorite guy. Oh, God, he played for Illinois. He played for Illinois this past year. Played for Florida last year.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh, the guy who killed John Fulkerson.
Everybody was mad at him.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody was mad at him last year. And again, I just saw him. I mean, I was literally like 6 feet away from him, scared for my life in Pittsburgh, because I thought he was gonna come run over and elbow me in the face. But that guy, you were frustrated about Fulkerson. You're wondering to yourself, man, if we had Fulkerson, we maybe could have beat Oregon State. Maybe you could have. I don't know. But there was a different feel last year. Last year, it was a feeling of frustration because the season never looked like you wanted it to look. There wasn't a ton of excitement. The excitement was around Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson. It wasn't around the team. I think you go into this offseason excited about the team going into next year because you've got reason to. You've got players come in that you think can help. Is Edwards the only commit? Signee, whatever?
Yeah, as of right now, Edwards is the only one. And that was also a point I was going to make, was this time last year, if I remember correctly, right now, in the end of March, beginning of April, you only had Kennedy Chandler and Jemai Meshack signed. You didn't have Huntley Hatfield, Adu, DeBonge, Ziegler, Tamba, or Justin Powell as a transfer. You didn't have any of those guys. You just had 2 guys in your class. So, yeah, and right now, Tennessee just has Edwards currently signed.
Right. So, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, there's still so much reason to be excited about what lies ahead, at least in my opinion, just because I'm looking at that roster and I'm like, man, if all these pieces come back, it's going to be a really good team next year. But they just have to all come back because you expect the development. That's a staple of Rick Barnes' teams, the development from season one and from one season to the next. And you get some more confidence out of Huntley Hatfield. Get some more confidence from Adu. Maybe Tamba develops where he can be a piece. You get Olivier Kamwa back. So now your interior situation isn't necessarily what it was this time last year. Now you lose Chandler. I get that. But everybody's excited about Ziegler. You've got Edwards that is a really good player. We'll see what happens on the wings. I mean, Josiah's back. Vescovy, let's see what happens with him. You look at the pieces that are coming back if they all come back, and obviously we're just talking on March 31st, if all these pieces are back in November with maybe an addition of perhaps a more experienced big. I mean, I don't know. Euros can kind of do some stuff, but I mean, at the end of the day, like Euros just kind of feels like the 5-foul guy. He may give you some points and rebounds along the way, maybe block a shot, but he's really out there to give you 5 fouls and get everybody excited. And look, there's merit in that. Like, I'm being clear. I mean, I'm not judging who he is as a player. I just expect him to foul out of every game, whether he does or not. I feel like that's how, I mean, and if he can kind of get under somebody's skin and get that person a technical or get that person fouled out, that's a win. Like, he had some really good performances. I thought he played well against Hunter Dickerson. He had some good moments there. Like, so like that. So if you can maybe bring in one more experienced big, just so you're not going into next year with a bunch of sophomores, a guy coming off a season-ending injury in Euros, maybe add one piece to that, maybe add one more wing, perhaps an elite wing. I don't know. I don't know how potential targets fit into that. But like I think there's reason you walk away from this season, it's bittersweet. You're frustrated about how it ended, but you can look back and see everything that transpired, and then you realize, man, we got a lot of this coming back. And we can just add a piece or two here or there. Why can't we be at the top of the SEC next year?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's going to? I mean, like I would take the approach. Who's better than us? Because that's the question. Like, if that's me asking it, Auburn was number one. We beat them.
Yeah.
Kentucky, we beat them twice. Arkansas, we beat them. And Arkansas went to the Sweet 16 or Elite 8, right?
One of those two. I think they went to 16. No, they went to the Elite 8. Yeah, that's right. They played Duke in the Elite 8. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like, you have to go into next season. Now Arkansas, they're recruiting.
Oh boy.
I'm just saying they're recruiting over there. Most of them is walking around somewhere with a sling on and no shirt on, but he's recruiting. And you got to recruit in this conference. Got to recruit. And Tennessee's going to recruit from the portal. I don't know. I mean, there's probably a 2023 kid who will reclassify. I don't know who. I don't know anything, but I mean, that's kind of how this works. That's how you got Huntley Hatfield.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you got Tamba. So I don't know, Blue Cane maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's a Tennessee target or what. Don't tell me offer. Like, is that a target?
Right.
There's a big difference there. And I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but those top teams, I don't know what Auburn has coming back next year. I don't know, but like I said, you better recruit. There's some teams that are going to take some steps back this year. See, looking at you, LSU, teams will take a step back.
Oh yeah, at least they should. At least, yeah.
South Carolina can't run much further back, but all due respect to my man Lamont Paris, I've seen 6 names hit that portal.
Yep.
And I never saw him bring in 6 in one cycle. He brought in 8 over a 3-year cycle that helped him win a championship and got him the South Carolina job. But 6 in one cycle. I mean, I believe there's a point guard he's getting from Belmont. I feel pretty confident about that.
That's a good point guard too.
Portal. Pretty good player. But that ain't the difference right there in that league. That one player is not going to, not knock you up from 17, 18 wins when the head coach was wanting to. He had his players out there fighting the opposition, not literally, but I mean, defense. To Lamont, who's all about, offensive efficiency. That's not going to be a quick turnaround there. So, Ole Miss, man, they're trying to fire their coach. They were looking for a reason to get rid of their coach. Florida, it ain't going to be them. Georgia, see Florida. I mean, there's so much opportunity to, basically start paying rent at the top half of the SEC. There's so much of an opportunity to get. You've got so much of of a head start on other teams in the SEC because of your stability. When everybody talks about hires, well, this guy he's not the guy. He's not the guy. I mean, you can look around that league and you can look and see what's at Missouri. Like when you start throwing names out, like Dennis Case, I think has the potential to be a pretty decent coach there. It ain't going to happen next year.
No, right.
I don't care how many people he offers in the portal. He can offer 25 damn people. I don't care. Like at the end of the day, like you got to put all those pieces together. Missouri isn't exactly a destination location for prospects. So let's say you look around the league, A&M could be decent. Who knows? But I mean, like there's so much of an opportunity for Tennessee to kind of just plant roots in the top 4 of the SEC.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that's a conversation I want to have kind of deeper into next week. But you're right. Like, I'm looking at kind of the recruiting landscape too for the SEC. And I mean, you're just talking about Auburn. As we're recording this, they literally just got a commitment from 5-star center Johan Traore, who I think was committed to LSU and then decommitted and then now is going to Auburn. But you look at that, you look at Arkansas having 3 5-stars committed with Nick Smith as a top 10 player, Jordan Walsh is a top 20 player, and then they got the commitment from Anthony Black, who's a top 25 player just a couple of days ago. They also just got the commitment from Missouri transfer Trevon Brazile, who's a 6'9" forward. You look at Kentucky, they only have 2 commits, but they're 2 guys ranked in the top 10 on 247, and Chris Livingston and Kaysen Wallace. So you mentioned, like, you're right, though. I think Tennessee, they're targeting, again, I mentioned Julian Phillips. They're targeting a forward who was once committed to Florida, who was a 4-star, actually maybe 5-star. He's a top 35 player. So whatever, he's a supposed to be a really good player too. So they've got a couple of guys they're targeting and recruiting, but you mentioned too targeting in the transfer portal and stuff. And Brandon Murray from LSU is kind of the big name that's been thrown around there for Tennessee as well. Who's a 6'5" kind of combo guard / 3 position there as well for LSU this past year. And if I remember correctly, he torched Tennessee in one of the games that they played against LSU. But to kind of go back to the season as a whole, I mean, you're right. Like who like looking at Tennessee compared to the rest of the SEC teams, I mean, I know Arkansas made the Elite Eight, and I would say that because of that, and just kind of also they finished pretty strong too. They're the only team I would say that you could point to and said they had a better finish to their year than Tennessee. And even then, it's like SEC tournament victory for the first time in 40 years, making an Elite Eight. Like that's almost comparable in my book, in my opinion, kind of. And Tennessee and Arkansas have had the 2 best years in the SEC overall, in my opinion, because if I'm Auburn or Kentucky, like the way the seasons ended for both those schools in the SEC tournament and then in the NCAA tournament, I mean, that talk about a massive disappointment. If I'm an Auburn fan, like I'm pretty upset with the talent they had this year and the coaching job Bruce Pearl did down the stretch, because everyone wants to, I see still several Vol fans wanting to gush over Pearl, and I get it. Like I don't fault people who still kind of miss the Pearl days because of his showmanship and the way Tennessee won under him. But he wasn't always the greatest in-game coach, and it showed. I mean, they relied, for whatever reason, they went away from running their offense through Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler and trying to go inside out, and for some reason let their guards do a lot of the lifting in the later half of March, and their guards were not good. Like, and they were not great. They're okay, but they weren't the kind of guards that, Pearl had when they made the Final Four run, or when, the couple years where they were really, really at the top of the SEC. I guess they were technically at the top of the SEC this year too. But I mean, if I'm Kentucky or Auburn, I'm not super pleased with the way the year went, because you had great regular seasons, but then in both tournaments, in the SEC and NCAA tournament, you crashed and burned. Kentucky got beat by Tennessee in the semifinals, which is a failure by Kentucky standards. They got bounced. Both I think both Auburn and Kentucky, if I remember right, both got bounced in the first round. Or one of them got bounced in the second, one got bounced in the first. Kentucky obviously got bounced in the first because that was St. Peter's that beat them. And they obviously went on their Cinderella run to the Elite Eight. But if I remember right, Auburn got bounced in the second round. But Gene, like, if I'm a Vol fan and looking at the way those seasons ended and kind of how the end of February and all of March played out for Auburn and Kentucky, I mean, there's no comparison. Tennessee had a much better year and a much better ending to the year than those teams. And again, the only other team in the SEC I would point and said you could say had a better ending to their year was Arkansas. And Arkansas has been no slouch over the past few years. In fact, Arkansas has a more storied basketball history than Tennessee because in the 90s, they were really darn good in men's basketball. I mean, and you look at, really, really good in like the mid 90s and 95, 96. So I think this year as a whole, like you said, 67 teams every year who even make the tournament end without getting to the ultimate goal of winning the championship. But that didn't even include, like, there's 300 something teams in Division I basketball. So technically, if you're looking at it that way, there's like 350 something teams that, don't complete the goal of winning a national championship. But even with that, like, I think a lot of fans would have felt better if you make the second weekend, because I think that was, you look at the Lady Vols, for example, I think especially if they lost to Belmont because it was an in-state school on your home court, that would have been crushing. But at least getting to that second weekend, the first time in since 2016, like, that was an accomplishment for that team. I think if this team had been able to get to the Sweet 16, there would be far less of a bitter taste in the mouths of a lot of Vol fans. But I think even with the way the season ended in the NCAA tournament, I still think this season to me will go down as one of the favorite seasons I've watched, because I got so invested in this team in February and in March, just because, again, they were fun to watch and easy to root for. And especially with, again, I always go back to Zakai Ziegler being kind of the heart of the team, even as a true freshman. But he's a kid that, fans already love him a ton. He's going to be loved his entire career at Tennessee. He's going to be a guy that's going to go down as one of the top 5 most liked and most beloved Vol players of all time. Maybe even in any sport, because I think, his fans, they are not even big basketball fans at Tennessee who love Zakai Ziegler because of his personality and just kind of the way he's embraced Knoxville and the way his family's embraced Knoxville. But Gene, it's hard to put a grade on a season. It's hard to say it was a success or whatever. But I don't have. I was upset and I had a little therapy session last episode you and I did for the first part of it. But overall, like, this season to me was a fun one, a good one, and one of the better ones I've watched, and from start to finish, one of the better ones I've watched for Tennessee men's basketball. And I think most people probably feel that way at this point. Now that we're a couple weeks removed from the Michigan loss, especially, I think most people have kind of calmed down a little bit and thought, okay, it was a good year, ended disappointingly, but there's been so many Tennessee basketball seasons that have ended disappointingly that you kind of get used to it at this point, to be honest.
Well, and let me just simply say this. I know a lot of fans will base their season off of this, what I'm about to say. And if this is the true measurement of your program, and if you've listened to this podcast enough, then you'll know that I don't think you should measure your program this way. But you went 2-1 against Kentucky. And I know, like, there are a lot of Tennessee fans that will base their success off of that particular rivalry. I don't think they should, because I think that they should aspire to be higher, better than that. But look, facts are facts. Beat Kentucky twice, won an SEC championship. Auburn kind of did the Tennessee thing of 3 years ago, where they got to number 1 in the country, got all the love, got all the attention. They didn't fall apart, but I guess they technically got a regular season championship out of it. But aside from that, heck, they got knocked out in the early round of the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament by A&M, and then got beaten the second round.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember that. Yeah, and they lost to.
They were
Miami.
a 2 seed. They got beat by Miami. Yep. Yeah, it was a 10 seed. I still laugh because I'm guessing that Miami didn't even pack its white jerseys, and all of a sudden they had to wear their white jerseys because all of a sudden they're the 10 seed. But no, I get it. Like, it's you want to be able to base success off of getting ready to play this weekend.
Yep, right.
A lot of teams don't get that. So how can you pull the small victories out? You point to things like the SEC tournament championship, the wins over Kentucky, the top 5 ranking, all things that not many people thought were going to happen. If you're being honest with yourself, back in November, You thought this was about a 21. I think you and I both predicted somewhere in the 20 to 22 win range, maybe 23. I think 23 is actually what they won in the regular season. Did they win? Yeah. 23-7, I believe, was their regular season record. So pretty much, kind of on there. But, if you look back at all the things that transpired, you knocked out Will Wade, who nobody likes up there. You went 2-1 against Kentucky, and you beat Conzo. I mean, like all the things that you want to sit back and look back on. I mean, heck, Texas Tech was in the Elite Eight this year. That's one of your losses. Villanova is still playing. That was one of your losses. Kentucky was a really good team. That was one of your losses. Arkansas, Elite Eight? No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elite Eight.
Okay, Arkansas, Elite Eight, beat them. I'm sorry, that was one of your losses. So you just
and you beat them too.
What's that?
I said, yeah, and you did beat Arkansas too because you played them twice. So you lost to them and beat them.
Yeah, and so you just look at the losses that you had, and the argument was always you lost to quality teams. It was the worst thing you lost to? Michigan?
Yeah.
I mean,
technically, yeah.
If we're being honest about it, it's probably your worst loss. And at the end of the day, you can sit back and say, man, the worst team we lost to was Michigan, who played for a national championship, 5 years ago?
I don't think it was that long ago. It wasn't that long ago at all, yeah.
No, the Villanova Michigan was like 2018, I believe. Somewhere in that range.
Yeah, they've made at least the Sweet 16. Aside the COVID year, they've made it 5 straight years now into at least the Sweet 16.
And that was your worst loss, perhaps, possibly. I mean, it was. I don't know. We really don't have to continue to just kind of beat a dead horse. It was a good season. It was a successful season. You saw players get better. You saw your team get better. Yeah, they struggled in the second round against Michigan at some key moments, and were able to get the job done. But I see nothing to be disappointed about because look, it could be worse. You could have lost to St. Peter's.
Yep.
And, you could have lost to St. Peter's. You could have lost to the U. I guess at some point, it's funny that we don't do the SEC basketball podcast anymore because, I think it's it was almost about time to ask the question. Was the SEC overrated this year?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. That'd be a good off-season topic for us to talk about.
And it's not fair because at the end of the day, we're talking about a one-game measurement, but you also see what 4 of the final 8 teams are ACC teams or something like that, and everybody wrote them off, talked about how they stunk this year because Furman beat Louisville and Citadel beat Pitt, and Citadel didn't even keep its coach after the season. They did so bad. And that's just, it's tough. And, but that I don't know. Again, I think it was a great league. I think it's an extremely talented athletic league. It's probably on par with the ACC and the Big Ten. I mean, Big Ten is always a disappointment in March, but all the media outlets are like Big Ten guys, and so therefore there's like 9 Big Ten teams in the top 25 because some guy that went to Northwestern, his wife is a Illinois grad, and so he decides to vote them 13th, so they'll get so they'll end up 25th in the poll or something. Just making that up, but that's the type of stuff that happens. And so, I mean, there's always a push to get those teams in there, and there are good ones. Michigan's a good program. Michigan State historically is a good program. Michigan State lost a tight game to Duke. So, but yeah, I mean, look, in the day, totality, Tennessee had a good season. Plenty of reason to be excited. Look forward to see what this roster looks like in June.
Before we end the podcast, you're talking about Michigan. Got me thinking, just their program in general. Gee, I did not realize just how ridiculously good they've been in the tournament. You're talking about Big Ten being overrated. They're one of the few exceptions of the Big Ten that's actually been consistently very good. in the NCAA tournament. Going back to 2013, they've only missed, obviously 2020 there wasn't a tournament, but since beside that 2020 year, they've only missed a tournament once since 2013, and that was in 15. In 2013, they were national championship runner-up. They lost to Louisville. In 2014, they made the Elite Eight, lost to Kentucky. In 2016, they won in the first four, lost in the first round to Notre Dame. In 2017, they made the Sweet 16, lost by 1 point to Oregon. 2018, they were national championships runner-up, lost to Villanova. 19, Sweet 16, they lost to Texas Tech. 2011, they went to Elite Eight and lost by 2 points to UCLA, and then this year to the Sweet 16, they lost to Villanova. So, I mean, they've been to at least the Sweet 16 every year except for 2016, and they've been in the national championship game twice, and they've been to the Elite Eight a couple other times as well. So, I mean, my goodness, they've had I didn't realize, I knew they'd been really good, but I didn't realize how good of a last decade they've had in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, with two different coaches.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Bayline and Juwan Howard. Yeah. Goodness.
Who used to have the most famous slap on television, but things have changed.
Really quick.
Yeah, life goes at you fast. Shout out to Will Smith. But yeah, I mean, that's tough, and you're losing to a program that the standard is Sweet 16s, and you hope that. Yeah, you certainly hope, because I don't know I'm pretty sure that you just told me that that Michigan has been to the Sweet 16 6 times since 20.
I was just thinking that they've been to the Sweet 16 as many times in the last 8 tournaments as Tennessee has in the last 25, basically. Yeah,
and that's kind of what I was getting at, and that stings a little bit. Yeah. But at the end of the day, look, that's what you're aspiring for, and if a program can aspire to be Michigan in terms of its success in March, and look, Michigan State's had those runs. Izzo's a great March coach. A lot of different guys have had, a lot of different coaches around the country have had that sort of success. Coach K, obviously, Gonzaga, and if you can aspire to win 2 games in March and be one of the final 16, all you can ask yourself, all you can ask is to throw your hat in that ring. And Tennessee's going to get there. Again, you just look at their recruiting and you can tell it's only a matter of time. Look at their retention, because it's recruiting. It's probably, in my opinion, it's probably retention first, recruiting second, development third. Mm. And if you retain players, you can develop them. And if you recruit the right players to your program, you can develop them. And you throw those two together, you're constantly bringing players back that are getting developed, and then you're recruiting players that can be developed, and all of a sudden you have a championship caliber program. But you can't have just a constant, you can't have just like a revolving door of talent coming in and out of your program. And I think that Tennessee is really starting to build itself to a place where kids don't want to leave. And decisions for the kids to not come back are probably more coaching staff, kind of asking them to maybe look at other options. And which, yeah, it stinks, because that's just kind of the ugly side of college basketball. But, for those who are fans, they're also looking at this like, we may lose, because now the excitement is, how can what better player can we find? What player can we find that is going to be better than Victor Bailey? Because now we got a spot, and that's the reality. And 3 years ago, it was Victor Bailey everybody was getting excited about.
Yeah,
you got this kid. You got this kid who's been in 2 Oregon teams. One went to the NCAA tournament. One went to NIT. Got experience. He's strong. He's athletic. Track guy. And so you can talk. Everybody talks themselves into the prospects, and so now they're going to bring in a kid who's probably had some success at his previous stop, maybe coming from a lower school or whatever, like a lower level school, and who may have put up 18, 19 a game or whatever. And now you can, hey, how can we fit this kid into what we're trying to do? This 2 guard, oh man, he's the next Jordan Bowden, and everybody will talk themselves into whatever it is. And look, that's the excitement this time of year, is that you just don't know. But you have reason to be excited, because what you know is you've got some pretty known quantities on your roster going into next year. And now it's just about filtering in filling in the gaps.
Yep, and that'll be a topic of conversation for next week when we do a next podcast. But before we end, Gene, I want to go back really quickly to a comment you made. I saw a meme on Twitter, the Spider-Man meme where they're both pointing at each other and it said Juwan Howard and Will Smith, and I I lost it when I saw that one. But you're right. There was the most famous slap on TV for like a month, and then it got replaced real quick. But anyway, I wanted that on a light note. But thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode. Really appreciate whether you watched it on YouTube or you listened to it on podcast. If you made it to this far at the very end of it, really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. We've been very appreciative of all your support. We've been here for a year now, Gene, as a Tennessee specific podcast / show, and we also just crossed the 10,000 download mark for episode number, I guess, in terms of being downloaded on the podcast recently as well. So big thank you to all of you for that. That's obviously, it speaks to the hunger of Vol fans for basketball. That numbers have grown a lot. Like that was a large portion of that 10,000 has come in the last 5 months or so. So again, thank you to all of you. This podcast, the show continues to grow. Really appreciate all of you all supporting us and helping this become a thing that I really look forward to doing with Gene or the Lady Vol podcast, or being able to lately interview the new additions to the Lady Vols roster, and hopefully we'll be able to have the same opportunity to do it for the men's team, because hopefully they'll go out and grab a couple of transfers as well. So again, just want to thank all of you for tuning in here. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.